Before leaving, please remember to make a contribution to all of my thousands of hours of work here. PayPal, Patreon, or fundraiser in the description below or on the China Rising Radio Sinoland article page. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. This article, video, and audio podcast is entitled Neil McCoy Ward Can Be Forgiven for Getting Everything Wrong About China. In his video, he's another member of the West's big lie propaganda machine, brainwashed masses. I should know, I used to be one too. Pictured above an outtake from Neil McCoy Ward's video that I watched about China. Here we go. A good friend of mine whom I deeply respect sent me this 12-minute video from a very popular vlogger named Neil McCoy Ward. With almost 300,000 YouTube subscribers, he obviously has the ears of many. Unfortunately, in this video, Neil gets almost everything wrong about Chinese history, the Chinese nation, and Baba Beijing, the latter being what I call China's millennial government leadership. I say this humbly because I too spent most of my life regurgitating the West's big lie propaganda machine, BLPM, anti-China vomit, so I can easily forgive him and all the others brainwashed from the womb with this stuff. First, Neil takes pages straight out of Frank Dicotter's fatuous, fictional, posing as MSM real history, end of quote, book on the 1959 to 1961 Great Leap Forward, abbreviated GLF, that book being called Mao's Great Famine. When I wrote the first book of the China trilogy called 44 Days Backpacking in China, I was still sucked into this well-paid CIA/Department of State/NED/Soros xenophobic anti-communist socialist, what's called SCAR literature. As such, I made mistakes concerning the Mao era, which were only 2% of the book. Be that as it may, after publication, I quickly realized my few yet important historical errors. These were fully corrected in China Trilogy Book Number 2, China Rising, then filled out with more detail in China Trilogy Book Number 3, Big Red Book on China. Next, McCoy Ward says that due to this Western fake news SCAR literature narrative about the Great Leap Forward, Chinese President Xi Jinping asked his 1.4 billion citizens to be frugal by restricting food consumption and requesting that citizens report on restaurants that waste food. This gives his viewers the impression that Chinese people are expected to survive with less food, with the implication that there must be food shortages. Again, hapless Neil gets it totally wrong. In order to cut down on food waste in restaurants, Baba Beijing recently promoted nationally what's called the Clean Plate program. Everybody across our pale blue dot knows developed economies waste as much food as they consume. Communist-Socialist China is the first country to do something about it, a noble and responsible goal indeed, beyond mere feel-good rhetoric. Also, Neil gets it wrong about restaurants being on the hook to cut down on plate waste. It is the 1.4 billion citizens eating out who are expected to order modestly so as to not waste. Baba has also passed a national directive to make America's famous take-home doggy bags de rigueur. Restaurants can also fine customers for flagrant waste and are encouraged to conserve food in the kitchen and in the dining room. For all this, kudos to the Chinese nation for being environmentally and agriculturally conscious, and again, I humbly forgive McCoy Ward for his Sino ignorance. Not only that, but Baba Beijing is listening to its people via China's long-standing consultative consensual democracy. Thus, it is passing many publicly reviewed laws and regulations that the masses are demanding. It is truly and incredibly amazing. You can read about it here. This article is full of hyperlinks, so go to the bottom of either SoundCloud, Brighteon, YouTube, etc. in the description, and you'll see the link. Next, Neil is hyperbolic or misinformed to say that there was an, quote, an emergency decree to the people to stock daily necessities for this winter in case of COVID confinement. It was neither emergency nor a decree. It was simply a seasonal notice to local governments, saying the Ministry of Commerce on Monday published a seasonal notice encouraging local authorities to do a good job in ensuring food supplies and stable prices ahead of winter. McCoy Ward gives his fans the impression that this was a Communist Party of China CPC desperation panic act, which is duplicitous at best. Nevertheless, notice the all-important adjective seasonal highlighted above. In fact, this notice goes out every year to all local authorities as a mere public safety reminder. And Ma Wenfeng, an analyst at AG Holdings Agricultural Consulting, says local government advice to residents to buy supplies ahead of winter is issued every year. It's not an emergency. Neil gives the impression that there was widespread panic across China as 1.4 billion scared and great leap forward conditioned citizens emptied the country's supermarket shelves. I communicate with people across China on a daily basis, and this is simply BLPM Sino vomit. The truth of the matter is, other than a few Chicken Littles, and they exist in every culture, consumer life in China is going on as usual, and Baba Beijing is using all its communist socialist tools to make sure inflation stays reasonable while energy and food supplies remain plentiful for the winter. McCoy Ward keeps hammering the word emergency or emergencies, giving the impression of possible doom and gloom. For millennia, responsible governments have always prepared for potential natural disasters, looming wars, and the Chinese are some of the best at it. Neil says that it is highly out of character for governments to ask their citizens to stock food. He must be talking about the ones that don't give a rat's ass about their 99% in order to protect their 1%. Baba Beijing cares deeply about its people. Not to mention knowing that SARS was, and COVID-19 is, Western orchestrated biowarfare on its people and economy, the Chinese nation is always in anti-imperialist, anti-global capitalist preparation. Why? Because China has been and continues to be at existential war with Euranglo-land, that being NATO, Five Eyes, EU, and Israel, since its communist socialist liberation in 1949. Next, McCoy Ward says inflation is going through the roof in Sinoland due to unusually large and widespread floods. Talking about floods, droughts, and earthquakes is akin to chatting with citizens across the U.S. Great Plains about tornadoes, where I grew up in Oklahoma, or people in the Gulf of Mexico about hurricanes. As big an area as Canada or the United States, with lots of mountains and coastline, China is always having floods, droughts, and earthquakes. In fact, between 108 BC and 1911 AD, there were no fewer than 1,828 recorded famines in China, or nearly one each year. Since 1962, there should have been in China, if their historical average remained unchanged, 50 serious famines. Instead, thanks to their communist socialist way of life, there have been 0. Therefore, all of Neil's floods and predicted freezing temperatures in China, which are going to create a spiral of sino-inflation and starving the people into another famine, is only for sino-haters. It simply is not going to happen. In global capitalist economies, yes, it is a planned harvest of humanity. In China, no. As far as that boogie bear COVID Delta variant McCoy Ward cited, my Chinese friends say life is back to normal, except that 99.9% of foreigners are not allowed in the country, which will not change until at least after the Beijing Winter Olympics in February 2022. When someone does come down with COVID or test positive, the local authorities can find that person, trace back all contacts, and then test them. Any positives are confined to for 15 days. Outbreaks are confined locally and efficiently with a minimum disruption in people's daily lives. As I wrote recently, COVID has not stopped the Chinese people from marching into the 22nd century socially, economically, infrastructurally, militarily, and technologically. The West can hit them with Gamma, Epsilon, Zulu, Zany COVID, and it will barely temporarily slow them down. Next, war with the USA to bring Taiwan back to the motherland? Sorry, Neil, I seriously doubt it. Uncle Sam would get its clock cleaned, knows it, and as I wrote recently, Baba Beijing is avoiding it like the plague and can make reunification happen without firing even one bullet. Then there's the supposed energy shortage scare. Edem for McCoy Ward. As I reported recently, Baba Beijing is whipping coal suppliers into shape to make sure electricity prices and downstream supply chains stay stable this winter. Lastly, that hoary propaganda chestnut, the Chinese real estate bubble. The BLPM has been getting China's economy wrong since 1949 because they think like capitalists and China is communist socialist. First, China's real estate, finance, and insurance sectors are all people-owned, often abbreviated FIRE, F-I-R-E. No one, not even Xi Jinping, can buy dirt in China. Chinese and foreigners can only lease it for 70 years. The world's 4 biggest banks are Chinese and all publicly Sino-owned, as are some of global Fortune 500's insurance companies. When big Chinese private companies go bankrupt, Baba Beijing moves in to efficiently reorganize its assets among the country's massive public state-owned enterprises, abbreviated SOEs, saving jobs while maintaining economic prosperity and social harmony for the masses. If there is corporate malfeasance, the officers and board directors face prison, huge fines, and if citizens were seriously harmed, capital punishment is not out of the question. Given that the people own China's fire, they can easily pass tax, occupancy, and anti-speculation laws and regulations to keep the real estate sector humming, which in fact they do all the time. Along these same lines, Neil piles on a lot of gloom-doom Chicken Little hysteria about the possible bankruptcy of one of China's biggest real estate giants, Evergrande. I have seen many Evergrande housing projects across China. Most have been very successful, but they got too big for their Sino britches. Its chairman, Hui Kaiyan, is using his billions of wealth to keep it afloat, which you sure don't see in global capitalist countries where tax-paying corporate socialism bails out the trillionaire dictators. What will happen to Evergrande if it goes south? The BLPM is predicting a global meltdown of the next 2008 Lehman Brothers which could be true among global capitalist countries, but that won't be the case for communist, socialist, anti-imperialist CSAI economies like China, Russia, DPRK, Iran, and others. Baba Beijing will take control of all Evergrande in-country assets and rationalize them into the people's SOEs while doing everything it can to make whole those citizens who got shortchanged in the process. Don't forget that during 1997's contrived Asian tiger meltdown, which was nothing more than a global capitalist trillionaire dictatorship asset harvest, as was 2008, the Chinese economy never broke a sweat either time. In conclusion, let's chalk up Neil McCoy Ward's horribly inaccurate video to being brainwashed since birth by the West BLPM. I hope it's not true. Nonetheless, if this video is a good example, it looks like he does not know the difference between shit and soy sauce when it comes to the Chinese nation. He has almost 1,500 patrons on Patreon, so he must be an awfully good financial advisor while rolling in the Benjamins. Here's my suggestion. For financial advice, go with Neil. When it comes to know the real truth about all things China, Asia, global geopolitics, support China Rising Radio Sinoland and China Tech Newsflash. Contribution links are above or buy the China Trilogy below, the 3 books below. Thank you. This is Jeff J. Brown signing out. Bye-bye.
China Rising Radio Sinoland and China Tech Newsflash signing out. Please make a contribution to all of my hard work. Thank you.